trasmette dal vivo. Bene. Okay, I think we are live now.
Yes?
Yes.
Shall I start?
Yes, we are live.
Okay. Hello, I warmly welcome you to our 54th webinar by the Academy of Space Renaissance International. And it's the first webinar in this year. And on this 8th of January 2024, I'm delighted that you have come to join us. And I also welcome you to 2024 and wish you a happy, prosperous, and peaceful new year. My name is Sabine Heinz, and I'm the person responsible for our webinar series and one of the vice presidents of SRI and also responsible for our art chapter. Our today's special guest is Remo Rapetti from Italy. Hello, Remo, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Me too.
And yes, it's very nice to have you here. And Remo will speak today about the contribution of humanities and social sciences to space exploration. We are really curious to learn more about this topic. And I also would like to welcome Adriano Ottino. He's also vice president and former president of Space Renaissance International, and he's one of the founders of SRI. Hello, Adriano.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Well, very welcome, everybody.
Yes. And Remo, before I give you the floor, I would like to introduce you to our audience. By the way,
Yes.
we have people watching from Great Britain, we have people watching from Belgium and from Germany.
Great.
Okay, to introduce Remo Rapetti, after a long career as director of Italian cultural institutes abroad, Remo Rapetti continued his activity as a cultural promoter and consultant. He has been the curator of many exhibitions that have been presented in Italy and abroad. For years, he was a consultant for international relations of NABA. This means New Academy of Fine Arts in Milano, and of the Futurarium Association. Since its foundation, he has been the coordinator of the Cultural Considerations Working Group of the Moon Village Association and has contributed to defining the cultural path of the group and to the organization of many webinars with the aim of deepening the various cultural themes related to space exploration. So we have actually the same goal like we at Space Renaissance International. He has published articles, translations, and critical introductions to books and catalogs. Recently, he has also contributed to the bi-monthly Italian magazine Coelum Astronomia. Remo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a very pleasure to be with you tonight.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm going to try to share my screen.
Do you need any help?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think that I have to start it again.
You should share your screen, the green
Yeah,
icon,
yeah, but
green icon in the bottom.
oh, here I am.
Okay.
Sorry, it's always difficult from the
No
technical
problem.
point of view. Okay, here I am.
Can you put it on full screen? Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. In the collective imagination, space exploration is
But Remo, you're not full screen yet. Is a click on visualizza or dalla diapositiva corrente.
no,
Adriano, I think
no, io
it's the second
credo
button.
credo di essere full screen. I think
No,
I'm
no, non sei full screen. Devi cliccare o dall'inizio a sinistra nel menu in alto, oppure in basso a destra, basso, proprio molto in basso. Ci sono quelle tre iconcine in basso, vicino al meno e più. No, adesso l'hai minimizzato. No, devi rifare la massimizza. In alto a destra, a sinistra della X. A sinistra della X c'è un quadratino.
Ah, ecco,
Aspetta,
eccolo qua.
vai.
Quindi presentazione
Qua ci siamo.
dall'inizio.
Aspetta, adesso vai in basso, proprio in basso della videata verso destra.
Io non ho niente qua.
Beh, lo vedo io il tuo schermo. Allora, in basso della videata,
Sì, verso destra.
dove c'hai diapositiva 1 di 34, equinozio italiano, ok? Vai
No, io non ce l'ho questo. Io non lo vedo questo.
verso destra, c'hai tre iconcine.
Sì?
Devi cliccare su quella più a destra dove c'è quella specie di schermo col piedestallo.
Io non ho niente di tutto questo.
Che strano, che strano.
Aspetta un attimo, eh.
Prova a
It's
Ma
cliccare
second
su...
button.
tu
Prova a
vedi, tu vedi le diapositive muoversi?
It's the second button. Della diapositiva corrente is a button.
No, so I shared the wrong.
Maybe the
I shared the wrong
wrong window. Yeah, could
video.
be. It could be.
So let's try again.
Yes.
So, as you can see or listen, we have a nice lecture now in Italiano. So we can learn a little bit Italiano.
Okay, here I am now.
It's a nice language, by the way.
Is it all right?
Share screen again.
Can you see it?
No, we
Not
only
yet.
see you. We see your face. Do you want to send me your presentation and I will turn your slides?
I think I can manage.
I get
We
some.
did it just now.
I got some comments in the chat if the lecture will be in Italiano. No, Mary culpa.
No,
Hello.
the lecture will be
The lecture will be in English.
okay.
The lecture will be in English.
Provided that we can start it. However, Remo, maybe the simple thing is send the PowerPoint to me.
Oh, it's complicated.
By
Let me
email.
see. Let me see.
we ask you for patience. We are
Yes,
trying to solve
just 1
everything.
minute. Just a minute. Should be here.
Maybe you closed the entire presentation, so you have to open it again.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. You're sharing. Good.
So perfect. Yes, the second button. No, this one, the other one on the right hand side. One more right. The button
Okay.
dalla diapositiva corrente.
Sabine,
I don't have it.
wait a moment. What are you seeing? You.
I'm seeing the first
Slide.
slide, the contributors of humanities. And so
Yes,
on.
but
So
at the left.
now I see the diapositive. Okay.
Okay, so now you can maximize it. Go down on the down right, in
Yeah.
basso a destra. Le vedi le tre iconcine?
Sì.
Ok, quella lì, la più a destra. La più a destra. Clicca.
Ok.
Però no. Però per qualche ragione non si massimizza, non capisco perché. Prova di nuovo a cliccare su quella lì piccola a destra.
Ma io non ce l'ho quella lì. Ecco, qui
Sì, quella.
sono qua.
Però non ci va. Che strano. Vabbè, senti, faccele vedere così, che dobbiamo fare?
Okay, leave it like this,
Let's go,
Adriano.
Okay.
let's go ahead in this way.
Okay.
Okay.
Just let's try if you see the slides moving. Can you see them moving?
I'm seeing the first slide.
This is wrong.
The
You know?
title.
No, I have to start all over again. Sorry.
Okay.
Mm.
But in the same time, send it to me, mandamela via email. E così almeno le giro io le slide e andiamo avanti.
Ok.
Ce l'hai il mio indirizzo? Aspetta, te lo do nella
Sì,
chat.
ce l'ho. Aspetta un attimo.
I hope you have some time here and yeah, again, for the ones which entered later, I would like to wish you a happy new year and hope you had nice holidays. And the meanwhile, Adriano and Remo are trying to solve the technical problems, and I'm convinced that Adriano will solve everything. He's a master, not master of disaster, he's a master of techniques. And I think he will manage this. And yeah, and we are looking forward to a new year with Space Renaissance International. We have new projects. We wanted to participate in many conferences. We have planned many conferences and activities. And although we are going to plan some art projects, Arno Greens is here in the chat, and he
Okay, I sent
offered
it.
his help, this great help. Yes, Jerry, we know what buttons we have to click, but it doesn't work. So he sent the email now, or the presentation via email. And
Remo, su che indirizzo me l'hai mandato? Su che indirizzo me l'hai mandato?
Vado a vedere.
te lo mandò?
Oh, maybe I'm getting it. Maybe.
Okay.
Spacerenaissance.org.
Yes, I got it. I got it.
Okay. No, we have the presentation at the site, and Adriano will open it and he will move the slides and share the screen, and so we can start immediately.
Maybe I can do it now.
Yes, I'm convinced you can do it. Thank you so much for your kind help, Adriano.
Sorry for that.
No, you have not to apologize. Sometimes in German they say the devil's in the detail. So yeah, Adriano is managing it, and thank you so much. We can start.
Okay, thank you, and sorry for that. In the collective imagination, space exploration is closely connected with scientific and technological progress. In fact, the space age coincided with incredible discoveries and inventions that have allowed the sensational missions of the last 60 years, but also has spilled over into our daily lives, bringing great improvements to most of our routines and habits.
You have to tell me when you want the next slide.
Yes, I will tell you, this is right now.
Okay,
Without
fine.
the satellite networks that now populate the low orbit of the Earth, those telecommunications that allow us to talk and see our family members or our business customers in the other hemisphere on a screen would not be possible. And the GPS system, which has made maps obsolete, would not work either. In the medical field, the space research has led to an unexpected development of MRI to improve the treatment of osteoporosis, which is a consequence of long space missions, to develop effective tools for fitness exercises, and to endless other scientific achievements. Research on indoor agriculture, an essential tool for the survival of settlement in space, also has positive consequences on the terrestrial environment, as these crops do not require a lot of water and pesticides. There is therefore no doubt that the most obvious effects of space exploration are of a scientific and technological nature. However, even in the field of humanities and social sciences, the space age has caused for many disciplines the need to adapt to a different cultural context and to face the new problems determined by the expansion of knowledge relating to our planet and the whole cosmos. Thus, new disciplines, or rather sub-disciplines, are born, which focus on the consequences that the space research has had and presumably will have on the intimate life of humanity, on our psychology, on human relationships in the new society, on the unprecedented challenges that the innate creativity of the human beings will have to face. But we can also say that humanities have and will continue to have a decisive role in shaping humanity's leap towards space, encouraging daring research, designing fantastic futuristic scenarios, identifying psychological and sociological problems, suggesting possible solutions, and supporting the weaknesses, doubts, and fears that human frailty has often raised. So let's start with literature. Without wanting to disturb the works of the ancient Greek and Latin writers who didn't put any brakes on their imagination by describing fantastic interplanetary journey, I would say that at the beginning of what will later be called the science fiction literature is the French writer Jules Verne, who, with his novel From the Earth to the Moon, published in 1865, described in great detail, even scientific details not entirely unfounded, the first trip to the moon in a spacecraft fired from a cannon. The book had great success and was read not only in France, but also abroad. A copy also ended up in the library of a young Russian who was to make a fundamental contribution to the start of space research, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Mathematics teacher at the age of 30 in 1887, he wrote a book entitled Na Lune, in which he hypothesized the possibility of a happy life in the absence of gravity on asteroids, on the moon, and on colonies of rocket ships in space, and expressed the opinion that the colonization of the cosmos can lead humanity towards perfection and immortality, modifying the evolution of the universe itself. A few years later, he also managed to publish the scientific work in which he anticipates a series of solutions that will become the basis of space research in the following years. For example, the need to have a multi-stage rocket where each stage had to be detached once the fuel was over. Also, another very important pioneer of space research, the American Robert Goddard, was influenced by Verne's books, but also, and above all, by the vast science fiction literature of H.G. Wells. As a young man, he was enthused by reading The War of the Worlds, published in 1898, which at the end of the 19th century had been the occasion for a vast debate on the Martians. In those years, Tsiolkovsky supported the possibility of the presence of inhabitants on Mars and proposed trying to communicate with them through mirrors. Wells, in an article entitled Intelligence on Mars, addresses the theme of the possible conflictual relationship between the two peoples and denounces colonialism and the conquest made by the more advanced countries against less civilized populations. He hypothesizes that the same thing would happen if the Martians conquered the Earth, taking it for granted that they were more evolved than the Earthlings. In fact, Wells, who followed the theories of Darwin and Huxley, was very interested in the social details, in the social implications of space research, but was less expert in the scientific details, which in his books often appear far from reality. For example, in The First Man in the Moon, Wells places selenites beneath the lunar surface, even though he hypothesizes the presence of an atmosphere. The other slides, please. Despite this, Goddard wrote that in January 1898, the story Fighters from Mars, or The War of the Worlds in and near Boston, appeared daily for several months in the Boston Post. This, as well as the story that followed it, Edison's Conquest of Mars by Garrett Putnam Service, captivated my imagination in a formidable way. This interest in science fiction literature materialized a few years later in the achievement of a doctorate in physics, 1912, and in 1919 in a volume entitled A Method for Reaching Extreme Altitudes. 7 years later, Goddard managed to launch the first liquid fuel rocket, which remained in the air for 2 minutes and 30 seconds and traveled 56 meters. It is the beginning of the space age. Even the German Hermann Julius Obert, another scientist responsible for the progress of rocketry, confessed in an interview with Enzo Biaggi that he had become interested in space research under the influence of reading Verne's novels, I thought about astronautical navigation when I was still a youngster, at 13, I think. I was reading a Verne novel. It was night, and I was tossing and turning in bed. It can go like this, I said to myself. It can't be a cannon that shoots the man. Something must take him to the stars. Already during the First World War, at a very young age, he was born in 1894, he designed a long-range liquid propellant rocket and proposed it to the Ministry of War, which rejected it because it was considered unfeasible. In the following years, also thanks to an increasingly vast popular literature, which informs the public of the scientific theories of Tsiolkovsky, Goddard, and Obert. I just mentioned the magazine Izvestia and the works of Perelman and Rinin in Russia, Max Valier and Willy Lai in Germany, Hainaut Pelterie and André-Louis Hirsch in France, etc. The movement is meeting with ever greater success, both with the authorities and with the public opinion. In 1929, great anticipation was caused by the news that the great director Fritz Lang was preparing a science fiction film entitled Frau im Mond, based on a novel by his wife, Thea von Arburg. Willy Lai, 20 years later, would say, please, next, thank you. It is almost impossible to explain the fascination aroused in Germany by the name of Fritz Lang at the time. The premiere of one of his films could not be compared to any other artistic event. The audience included literally all those occupying prominent positions in the arts and letters, as well as a notable representation of high-ranking government figures. Next slides, please. As Arthur C. Clarke observed, rocket scientists used science fiction for the express purpose of spreading their ideas. Both Tsiolkovsky, Obert, and von Braun wrote works of science fiction at different times, not to predict the future, but to create it. However, despite a growing popular interest in science fiction and also in popular scientific literature, spaceflight fails to attract the attention of academic or even political authorities. Indeed, the 1930s were particularly eventful from a political point of view. In Germany, the advent of Nazism forced most of the Verein für Raumschifffahrt members, including Werner von Braun, to change jobs, and some intellectuals, including Fritz Lang and Willy Lai, to leave the country for the United States. In Russia, the Great Terror unleashed by Stalin claimed an illustrious victim in Korolev, who was even in prison. Even in the USA, Goddard is unable to continue his experiments, and only the help of the billionaire Guggenheim allows him to create a laboratory in Roswell. Strange enough, Lai's arrival in New York marks a turning point for the popularity of interplanetary flight in the United States, thanks to the collaboration that the German writer manages to build in a short time with the publishers of the science fiction magazines that have been spreading in the country for several years, especially Astounding Stories. This magazine, in particular, under the direction of John W. Campbell, becomes a showcase of the best American science fiction writers, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Lester Del Rey, Alfred von Vogt, etc., which Lai will also be able to make known to European friends, among whom the name of Arthur C. Clarke stands out, who writes, next please, During the entire Second World War, for example, Willy earned my eternal gratitude by continuing to send me at his own expense all the copies of the magazines of science fiction that were released in America, and which, due to the situation in England, I would not otherwise have been able to find. Unfortunately, attention towards rocketry had to be greatly increased during the war, when it was discovered that Nazi Germany had made incredible progress in that field, concentrating on the war use of rockets. Between the end of 1944 and the beginning of 1945, Germany sent thousands of flying bombs over London and other European cities, making the Allies understand that this was the future of armaments. The victory of the democratic forces allowed the victorious nations, in particular the United States, to come into possession of a large number of V2s and to see that very many German scientists, including Werner von Braun, handed themselves over to the victors. The collaboration with the German scientists who operated under the control of the War Department and were directly employed in Army and Navy military projects, contributed to a rapid progress in missile studies, which in the United States had also reached the very high levels with Goddard, as was recognized by von Braun himself, but which the isolation of the American scientists and the lack of faith that the political and military authorities had in his theories had underestimated. In the meantime, Willy Lai continued his work of scientific dissemination through articles and books, focusing in particular on rocketry and the conquest of the cosmos, thanks also to the precise information obtained directly from von Braun, with whom he had resumed contact upon his arrival in the United States. Next, please. In 1949, Lai published the book The Conquest of Space, about which Arthur C. Clarke wrote several years later. Next, please. The influence of this work on the formation of new readers and new science fiction writers of the early 50s was, to say the least, fundamental. One could observe a planetary or sidereal landscape of an unprecedented, unparalleled beauty, images which, incredibly, in recent times, have become real because they are more or less identical to those that the probes and satellites sent us from the moon and planets. In fact, the book was enriched by Chesley Bonestell paintings that made a fundamental contribution to the success of the work. I will return to Bonestell's role later, but now I will focus on Lai's narrative, which dedicates ample space to the moon and the recent experiments carried out at White Sands, now decidedly aimed at the use of multi-stage rockets. Next, please. On that day, a V2 rocket carried not the usual warhead weighing 1 ton, but a smaller rocket of the WAC Corporal type. When the V2 reached its maximum speed and had exhausted all its fuel supply, the small WAC Corporal took off in turn, while the V2 descended. The small rocket reached a height of 400 kilometers as required, that is, outside the atmosphere. Von Braun himself later stated that that launch changed the American government's attitude towards the space race, and that in that year, 1949, the idea that one could go to the moon conquered America. The ever-increasing interest of the public the multiplication of science and science fiction magazines, the publication of a high-quality scientific dissemination works, including the books written in collaboration by von Braun and Willy Lai, convinces the government authorities to commit themselves not only in the development of military equipment, but also in the experimentation aimed at the flight of rockets beyond the atmosphere, which was the aim that the group of scientists and writers working with von Braun had set. Of course, not only literature, but also the visual arts contributed enormously to the creation of enthusiasm, hope, and expectations among the public. For example, von Braun himself recognized the importance of the contribution of comics. Next, please. Thousands of young people dream of a world in which the power of missiles no longer has secrets, already imagining being able to circumnavigate the Earth aboard the spaceships, land on the moon, and converse in a familiar manner with the inhabitants of Mars. The ease with which comic book heroes already do all this leaves them in no doubt that such a future is very close. Since the beginning of the 20th century, comics introduced, even with a satirical intent, science fiction themes. But the golden period, next please, but the golden period began in 1929 with the publication of Buck Rogers, followed in 1934 by Flash Gordon, in 1939 by Superman, in 1950 by Dan Dare. Their stories were inspired by the novels of Verne, Wells, Burroughs, and the short stories by Ray Bradbury. This trend extends beyond the borders of the United States and is also established in France, Futuropolis, Electropolis, in Italy, where the first science fiction comic book, Saturn Against the Earth, was written by a great screenwriter like Cesare Zavattini, and after the war in Japan, Astro Boy. But what contributed enormously to spreading the myth of space as a new frontier were the paintings by Chesley Bonestell, published on Life in 1944, which represented Saturn seen from its moon. I will not dwell on the life and qualities of the artists, as in this series, an entire webinar has been dedicated to this topic. I will only attempt to underline the importance that these works and those that followed, and Bonestell's collaboration with Willy Lai and the producer George Pal had in the 1940s and 50s in bringing to the attention of the general American public the fact that the exploration of new worlds was scientifically and technologically possible, and indeed it was the destiny of Americans to pursue and implement it. Next, please. As Catherine L. Newell writes in her book Destined for the Stars, the question is why America decided to go in the first place. The answer to this question is complicated and certainly reaches deeper than the moon landing. But some part of it lies in the space paintings of Chesley Bonestell and their promise of a new frontier, adventure, exploration, and a possible escape plan at the end of the world. In fact, the great popular success of the paintings on Saturn was recognized by most of those who dedicated themselves to studies and activities related to space as the main source of inspiration for undertaking that career. Next, please. In particular, the image of Saturn seen from Titan opened up the possibility of space exploration as something beyond the daydream and more than a career. It promised the greatest adventure awaiting humankind, the quest to conquer the final frontier, according to Newell's analysis. After the Saturn paintings, Bonestel was sought after by numerous other magazines and planetariums and continued to paint astronomical scenes. Particularly successful were his paintings about the moon. After the publication of the aforementioned The Conquest of Space in collaboration with Willy Lai, cinema also began to take an interest in the topic. Until then, cinematic science fiction in the United States had been limited to the transposition of the stories of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, superheroes who, like their counterparts in Western movies, faced incredible adventures without showing any fear. But it was a producer of Hungarian origin, George Pal, who initiated a more scientifically based science fiction, more suitable for adults than children. Pal was inspired by the article Trip to the Moon, written by Bonestel for Life in 1946, secured his collaboration as a special effects artist, chose Irving Pitchell as director, Robert Heinlein as a screenwriter, and next, please, Destination Moon was born, which was a great success, won numerous awards, and started a series of successful films such as Flight to Mars, When Worlds Collide, The Day the Earth Stood Still. The public was now ready to accept, indeed to desire, that America would fully commit to space exploration, and was very disappointed when they realized that the Soviet Union was far ahead in space research. Next. And it took John Fitzgerald Kennedy's famous speech in Rice University Stadium on September 12, 1962, to raise the nation's morale. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept. But beyond the enormous contribution that literature, art, and cinema gave in the past to preparing US citizens to become passionate about space research and to make it an important purpose for the whole nation, other humanistic disciplines are also particularly useful for addressing cultural and social problems related to space travel. First of all, I would like to mention a discipline that probably no one would think about: archaeology, or rather, space archaeology. Harris Gorman, an Australian space archaeologist, so defines the task and the goals of a discipline. Space archaeology investigates these artifacts and sites for what they can tell us about human behavior, geopolitics, and the history of science and technology. Space archaeology is about the terrestrial and exoatmospheric materials, how they are used and discarded, and the social meanings they generate. Next, please. Mapping the distribution of space material culture through space and time is necessary as the background to a finer-grained understanding of its role in the human engagement with space. The examination of artifacts, machines, and the built environment of space has much to offer in a reappraisal of the mechanisms of cultural and technological change in the late industrial world. But why should we study with archaeological methods a culture that is contemporary to us, that our fathers had to create? The British archaeologist Graham Fairclough explains it to us. Next, please. Archaeological study has the ability to focus on the relationships between material culture, documents, and living memory, and to accommodate complexities and conflicting perspectives instead of a single knowable past. In short, a complex and multidisciplinary study of a historical period through material culture, documents, and human behavior avoids us giving an unambiguous and obvious portrait of that period and allows us to get to the bottom of the motivations and procedures that characterize the events also of the recent past. Therefore, for a complete and truthful history of the space age, we will have to examine all the ideological, political, economic, and technological elements that led to the human conquest of space, and in particular to the exploration of the first celestial body on which man put a foot off Earth. This is why it is especially important to preserve for future visitors to the moon, astronauts, scientists, doctors, researchers, tourists, etc., the sites and the scattered objects that humanity has already sent or brought to the lunar surface, and that are still there, untouched, and sometimes still functioning. Next, please. As Gorman and O'Leary say, at the core of space archaeology methodology is the contention that the material culture can tell stories inaccessible from the documentary records, reflecting their function and role within the ideology of the era. It isn't the difference between what something is and what it was supposed to be that we can find new perspectives on the archaeology of us. Next, please. Another important discipline is space design, which researches how to make life easier for astronauts in space or on other planets by inventing new objects or new forms of commonly used objects so that they can be used without difficulty in low gravity. Next. And what about space architecture, which is called to plan the dwellings of the future explorers of the moon? But also philosophy, anthropology, human geography, politics, religion are called to play a central role in evaluating and directing the ways in which our future is imagined, shaped, and transformed, and to confront the primary question: are we really alone in the universe? But I would now like to focus a little longer on a discipline, in my opinion, fundamental, without whose support it would not have been possible to proceed with the management of the human element involved in space research all this year. That is space psychology. Space travel involves, as is known, considerable physical risks for those who undertake it, risks which increase with the length of time spent in space. The current record for continuous stay in orbit still belongs to the Russian cosmonaut Valery Polyakov, who spent 438 days on Mir between 1994 and 95. But more recently, some American astronauts have also completed long-duration missions on the International Space Station. Scott Kelly flew over our planet for 340 days in 2015-16, and more recently, 2021-22, Mark van der Hey broke every American record with his 350-day mission. These and other long-duration missions have allowed the scientists to thoroughly study the effects that prolonged stay in zero gravity with limited possibilities of movement and exposure to significant amounts of solar radiation has on the human body. Apart from the initial discomfort due to space adaptation syndrome, SAS, which involves nausea, headache, and lethargy for a few days, the astronauts showed muscle atrophy, osteopenia, alterations in the production of red blood cells, cardiovascular dysfunction, reduction in effectiveness of the immune system, sleep disorders, etc. Some of these negative effects disappear after returning to Earth, and for other more long-lasting ones, scientists have developed behavioral strategies and medications that reduce the medical consequences of space travel. To give just one example, astronauts perform physical exercises for 2 hours a day using equipment such as the exercise bike and treadmill to maintain muscle tone. Much less attention, however, has, for many years, been given to the psychological consequences of space flight and long-duration flight in particular. In reality, psychologists were used regularly during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, but almost exclusively for the purpose of astronaut selection. In fact, using techniques that have been tested for many years for choosing fighter pilots, the psychologists had to make sure that the candidates had the right qualities, the right stuff, to face the new challenges. They had to demonstrate that they were virtuous, intelligent, and skilled professionals representing the best that America had to offer, according to the description of Lonius. But the psychological repercussions due to the numerous stressors that the missions entailed were completely overlooked, or at least hidden from both the public and the scholars themselves. In fact, NASA believed that making known the many drawbacks, reduced energy levels, difficulties in human relationships, bad decisions, failures in memory and attention, etc., did not constitute good publicity for the space programs. However, already in the 1970s, several psychologists, Joseph Kubis and Donald Lindsley, Mary Connors, and others, began to address the problems associated with group dynamics, environmental habitability, interpersonal interaction, etc. But we had to wait until the 2000s for the spreading of psychological studies on the consequences that the difficulties encountered by astronauts during missions had on their mental health. Also because the entry into operation first of the Mir space station and then of the ISS had multiplied the stressors related to mixed crews, both on the basis of nationality and gender. Until then, in the absence of data relating to astronauts, psychologists had used the information that could be obtained from experiences made in terrestrial environments, which in any case reproduced a large part of the living conditions of space shuttles. For example, the scientific bases in the Antarctic, the submarines, and extreme laboratory-built environments. Go back to the 25th, please. Back. These situations have in common with life in space long periods of inaccessibility, lack of communications and contacts, limited possibility of real-time assistance, large need on the part of individuals and groups to make autonomous decisions, to solve problems, to dissolve conflicts, self-control, and self-regulation. These latter characteristics risk creating further opportunities for conflict, this time with external support staff who would demand a more accurate compliance with the times and methods of action expected before departure. Studies conducted in these extreme environments on Earth have highlighted numerous possible psychological problems, such as tension due to the difficulties of the external environment, factors emerging from the heterogeneity of the group, poor cohesion of the crew, incorrect use of leadership, cultural and linguistic differences. The selection of mission personnel is therefore of great importance, which must be based not only on the obvious exclusion of pathological tendencies, but also on the choice of personalities with the most functional characteristics for the type of mission being organized. In particular, it was discovered that group dynamics and the human reaction to isolation and confinement have an enormous influence on the success or failure of the mission. The result of all these studies conducted in space-like environments was the publication by the National Academy of Science of the report, next please, Safe Passage, Astronaut Care for Exploration Missions, which drew attention to the possible negative consequences of long space journeys and introduced the concept of behavioral health. Next, please. A few years later, Albert Harrison defined it with these words. Compared with previous formulations, such as mental health, behavioral health is less limited because it recognizes that efficient and positive behavior depends on interaction with physical and social environments, as well as on absence of neuropsychiatric dysfunctions. Behavioral health is evident not only at the individual level, but also at the group and organizational level. At this point, NASA too decided to recognize the importance of factors such as privacy, leisure activities, separation from family, cultural awareness, the beneficial effects of windows and observation points, and many other issues that had until then been neglected because they were considered frivolous and irrelevant. Naturally, what NASA was most interested in was not so much the well-being of the astronauts, but the influence that these factors could have on risk and performance. Nowadays, astronauts are fully aware of the possible effects of mood states such as stress, boredom, and many other factors on safety, efficiency, and quality of life in space. However, some of them remain reluctant to undergo psychological tests because they fear that, despite assurances of confidentiality, the result of their participation in the test could result in a ban from flying. With the beginning of NASA's collaboration with the Russian Space Agency, it became known that cosmonauts had also show negative side effects in their missions, such as palpitations, anxiety, mood changes, depression, tendency to isolation, conflicting reactions with the rest of the crew, and with mission control. Even several Soyuz missions in 1976, 85, and 97 were interrupted due to the psychological problems of the cosmonauts. Even the Americans, on the other hand, experienced serious conflicts between the crew and mission control. An example was Skylab 4, in which the astronauts went on a one-day strike to protest against the ever-increasing workload, the shortening times for meals and free time, and the prohibition of looking out the window. As already mentioned above, the stress factors were multiplied by the increasingly frequent use of crews of mixed race, gender, culture, and nationality. If on the one hand, the participation in the missions of Black and female astronauts soon erased the stereotypes and prejudices linked to the aforementioned differences, on the other hand, several elements remained active that require attention from psychologists. An important question, for example, was whether for efficiency purposes, it was advisable to use crews made up of men and women. In fact, it was discovered that there is a difference in approach to work that can influence team performance, in particular in leadership style and reaction to stress. Next, please. However, scholars have concluded that the presence of both men and women appears to normalize group behavior and promote individual and group functioning. And that, next please, groups composed of both men and women perform well in tasks that require diverse perspectives and interpersonal skills, and cohesion appears to increase due to women's interpersonal style and their ability to involve all group members in the task at hand. Solving the problems that arose in multinational missions was more complicated. The Russians were the first to host foreign cosmonauts on their spacecraft. For example, the Czech Vladimir Remek in 1978 and the French Jean-Luc Chrétien in 1982. But they were treated as guests and not as colleagues, and were prevented from touching anything. Collaboration with NASA began in 1995, but the level of crew cohesion did not improve, and communication difficulties also extended to the ground support teams. At the root of the misunderstandings was the lack of trust in the other's competence, but fundamentally, the cultural differences had the greatest weight. According to J.B. Richer, specific studies conducted on this problem revealed that the Russian culture places greater value on collectivism, hierarchical power, paternalism, and thinks more about survival than well-being, while Americans value individualism, egalitarianism, autonomy. Next, please. Furthermore, communication difficulties due to different styles of verbal and non-verbal interaction, irritating differences in leadership decisions, different work processes, and unsimilar hygiene and food preparation standards were noted. To overcome these serious inconveniences, which jeopardized the success of the mission and the safety of the personnel in flight, the two space agencies have activated preparatory procedures which are proving effective. Before the mission, the astronauts which attend a seminar lasting at least 1 day, in which they are introduced to the customs and intercultural problems associated with the nation of their future foreign colleagues. And in the case of long-duration missions on the ISS, they are offered the possibility to live a few weeks with the family in Russia. Of particular importance was the choice to subject cosmonauts and astronauts to longer joint training both in the United States and in Russia. To support this attempt at cultural integration, a branch of psychology was developed. Next, cross-cultural psychology, which has the aim of studying the similarities and differences in individual psychological functioning in various cultural and ethnic groups, and the relationships between these variables and the socio-cultural, ecological, and biological variables, and current changes in these variables, according to the studies of Berry and other colleagues. However, other psychological techniques have long been used to study the behavioral health of astronauts in order to improve their well-being on mission and their safety. Remote observation of facial expression and computerized analysis of words were particularly useful to assess the level of ongoing stress. Furthermore, behavioral self-analysis has been introduced with the help of digital assistants, which are able to measure the cognitive functioning of the human being, attention, information processing, memory, and allow the astronaut to evaluate his own psychological preparation to face a particular task. On the other hand, the evolution and improvement of space psychology studies have highlighted the existence of absolutely positive effects on the personality of the members of a crew engaged in space missions. We therefore speak of positive stress, eustress, which leads to personal growth, fun, a sense of satisfaction, camaraderie, and a change in values. Russian psychological studies, Myasnikov, Zamaletdinov, and others, have also found long-lasting positive psychological effects after cosmonaut missions. For example, the decrease in state of anxiety, hypochondria, aggression, and depression. In short, it is clear that during a stay in particularly difficult environments, human beings develop a particular ability to manage stress and challenges, and this lastingly strengthens their personality and spirit. But perhaps the most positive effect the astronauts and cosmonauts themselves have recognized as having brought back to Earth is the overview effect, the human being's reaction to seeing the Earth from the outside. Discovered and studied since 1987 by Frank White, the state of wonder and awe, of unity with nature, of transcendence and universal brotherhood, has also had an important influence on the birth of ecological movements. Next, please. The view of the Earth from space presents a well-known natural and human features from a remote perspective and offers a view of the total Earth, which obscures demographic differences and national borders. Taken together, these characteristics can dispose the viewer to a heightened sense of international unity and perhaps even humanitarian attitudes. Sorry, this is the last one. You should go back a little bit. Okay. Given these positive effects, NASA which had initially discouraged and even prohibited, as mentioned above, the observation of Earth from space for fear that it would distract the astronauts from their tasks, encouraged the crews to practice in their free time photography from the portholes of space stations and train them for this purpose. The hundreds of thousands of photographs brought back to Earth have made it possible to precisely document the geological, geographical, meteorological, and oceanographic characteristics of our planet, and to study environmental changes, extreme episodes, devastating fires, etc. Furthermore, these activities served to alleviate the stress factors, to bring the flight personnel closer to the homeland, and in particular to their places of origin, which are the subjects most photographed by each astronaut. I would have also liked to focus on another discipline, which, in my opinion, will be of extreme importance and usefulness in addressing many of the difficulties that humanity will encounter in organizing, regulating, and administering the future settlements on the moon and on other planets, namely space sociology. However, I know that you recently had a webinar entirely on this topic, and therefore I will limit myself to quoting a passage by Jim Pass, who worked so hard to bring this discipline to the attention of the authorities. A warning bell must be sounded, however. We should hope and plan for utopia, but remain prepared to deal with dystopian conditions. With proper consideration, the initial utopian conditions are unlikely to devolve into chaos or anarchy. So we can expect value conflict, social groups with different agendas, as well as deviance at all levels of social reality. For example, micro, middle, and macro levels. To minimize the social conflict and cope with it, we must take certain precautions. As discussed earlier, we must put into place the social institutions necessary to provide the life functions for the colony, as well as to cope with social change and social disorganization. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're very welcome. Quite interesting presentation.
Yes, I thank you so much for this interesting presentation. And it's nice always to see that you build a bridge between art and science, that you mentioned Cecily Bones there. I really admire his artwork. And also Jerry Stone was mentioning that certainly it can be said that a major reason for mankind's desire to explore the moon, as well as sending probes to the planet, is an incredible work of Chesley Bonestell. It's not only his work, but I gave a lecture about why art in space, and I talked about what impact artists, writers had into the space development, into science, and so it's very, very interesting, and I'm really happy that you mentioned this, and all the other aspects of human space flights. And I would like to thank you very much. And Adriano, do you have some remarks?
Well, many things came to my mind during the presentation because it was touching a lot of different particular points from science fiction, let me say the traditional science fiction, to the literature, to the movies, and to the other cultural aspects of the, let me say, the future narration, let me say so, and then the sciences, the so-called human sciences that are, however, contributing important concepts to prepare, no, to prepare somehow our expansion into space. And yeah, I think it will be just a general, very, very general comment that we should start thinking more than to the astronauts. We should start thinking about the civilians in space that will probably we hope so, in a few decades to be working on the moon and in some Lagrange points on air infrastructure and mining the asteroids and doing all the things that we have seen in a modern science fiction work, that is The Expanse by James Corey. And yeah, and of course the social problems will be there, and maybe new differences, because we only now on Earth we only are aware of the skin color differences, but going to living to space at different gravity conditions and so on, we will experiment other differences that could generate other social problems, discriminations and so on. But as humanists, we at Space Renaissance think that the expansion will generate so many benefits from the economical and yeah, from the development point of view, the possibility to of social growth of people on Earth and in space, that the balance, the social balance, will be positive. It will not be a very quick process. It will require decades. But we also shall think that in the past century, the industrial evolution was so quick that it couldn't be imagined in the first half of the century. But in the second half of the century, we have seen that so many incredible things were realized: the civil aviation, the individual mobility by the cars and the other means of transportation, and so on, and then the communication means, the general network, the age of the metabolism of information, as Kraft-Erike called it. Kraft-Erike was maybe the only one that in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, was able to predict the network, the worldwide network, World Wide Web.
No, Stanislav Lem predicted it earlier, I guess.
Who? Sorry?
Stanislav Lem.
Stanislav Lem, yes. So, but they were very few futurologists that were able to predict that. So I think that maybe now we are not able to predict something that will rise and happen in a, maybe few years, and yeah, it is an exciting age. Let's hope that the crisis will not overwhelm everything, and the wars not make their very, very bad work, that is to suppress creativity and ingenuity and so on. So okay, so however, we are working, we are doing what we can, okay, in our capabilities to bring ahead this initiative, the expansion of civilization into space. And we hope that this simple, let me say simple, but it's not simple, this simple action to start expanding will provide a hope for everybody. So I think that this is a reverse action, no? Is an action of the technological expansion and to the philosophy. We need the philosophical support, something that give hope to the young people, that turn on, that sparkle, that make youngsters to say, oh, there is something interesting to work on, something for our future, and so on. So we believe that expanding civilization into space will ignite this thing, and we are working very hard for that. And so thank you very much for this lecture. That is definitely let me say a break in this.
Maybe Remo wants to answer to your comment. Do you want to
Oh,
make some remarks?
I think that Adriano is right. We should be really prepared for the future steps into the cosmos. In the past, humanity did many things without a real preparation. Bonest has launched the idea of a new frontier, or the final frontier. But we cannot do as it was done in the past centuries in the United States, to go to the unknown countries west. We should really be prepared, because too many lives are in danger for the new space activities. So we really have to work all together, scientists, technicians, philosophers, sociologists, psychologists, etc., to have a very well organized action towards unknown spaces. This is what I think. We should do that. We should be finally one species, only one species, and work together without differences of skin, of religion, of also political faith, and so on. This is what I think.
I agree with you, and this leads me to our next speaker, to our next webinar. Thank you, Remo Rapetti, for being with us, for giving us a lecture. And the next webinar will be on the 22nd of January. And Frank White will talk about the urgency of large-scale space migration. So I think we have another bridge to the next topic. And I thank you all for being here with us. Thank you, Adriano. Thank you again, Remo. And thank you to our audience for staying with us so long, late in the evening. And I wish you a nice evening and a nice start in the new year. And I hope we will get peace in the world. That is my biggest hope for this year, that we will have peace.
That's important.
Okay, thank you so much, and I hope to see you all on the 22nd of January. Okay,
Thank you.
bye.